Hey guys, Dr. Bodle here, and today we're going to talk about if eating gluten-free is worse for you than eating gluten. Let's discuss. So as you probably know by now, autoimmune conditions like Hashimoto's can decrease our tolerance for environmental triggers, and that includes the very foods that we eat. Certain foods, such as gluten, which is the general name for a collection of proteins found in wheat, barley, and rye, are more likely to cause immune system issues because of a number of different factors. This can include things like molecular mimicry. Essentially, some of the protein combinations within gluten looks similar to some of the proteins within our thyroid gland. And therefore, when we already have antibodies that are specific for proteins and enzymes in our thyroid, when we're exposed to gluten, we end up having a reaction to both. The other possibility is that gluten tends to be a more complex protein. With more complex proteins, it can be a little bit more difficult for our bodies to break them down, which can then trigger our immune system as it thinks that we might have some sort of virus or bacteria which is trying to invade our system. Lastly, some of the genes that predispose people to developing conditions like celiac disease are often shared by people who develop Hashimoto's. But even if we don't always know the exact reason for an individual, the connection is clear. And the influence of nutrition and its ability to contribute to us having better outcomes with our symptoms or worse is clearly represented in the literature. So for all those reasons, and for many of the reasons that I've talked about on my channel before, you might be thinking that going gluten-free could be a great option as you work to improve your health. So is eating gluten-free worse than eating gluten for people with Hashimoto's? Well, the answer is no, but we have to be careful. And even though we might have the best intentions with going gluten-free, there are actually some mistakes that we can make that can end up perpetuating our autoimmunity. And even though we might be avoiding that key ingredient of gluten, if we continue to make these mistakes, it's going to prevent us from getting better. So what exactly do I mean by this? So the first thing that we need to understand is the function of gluten within our food. Yes, you might think it's just some random protein, but there's much more to it than that. Gluten has binding properties to it. It holds things together, and it allows things like dough to be stretchy and pliable. Gluten also provides texture for foods and has been said to improve palatability and overall mouthfeel. And finally, gluten itself is actually a flavor enhancer. So, as you can probably see, it does a lot of different things. And if you try to strip it out of a food, it's going to make that food crumbly and fall apart. Eating the food can just feel a little weird or off in your mouth, and it likely won't taste as good or be as enjoyable. So if someone decides to go gluten-free for their health, and as I said, even with the best intentions, they might think, well, I just need to go to the grocery store and pick out all of the things that are labeled as gluten-free. If I can just stick to that and use that as my guideposts, I know I'll be following my diet appropriately, and hopefully, of course, that will lead to better outcomes with my symptoms. And yes, for some people, taking that gluten-containing food and swapping it for its gluten-free replacement could be a big deal. But if you've maybe tried that and didn't see a lot of change, here's where you need to pay attention. All those things that I just talked about, all the things that gluten does for our food, acts as a binder, provides better texture, improves the flavor. Well, if we decide to manufacture a food and remove gluten from that food, then we need to, in some way, figure out how to replace all of those functions that gluten provides. And that's not always the easiest thing to do. First, we need to find a way to hold our food together. And if we're not using gluten, then we have to find some other type of binder. This typically involves things like xanthan gum, guar gum, and maybe psyllium husk. These things don't have the exact same elasticity as gluten, and so they might be used in higher amounts or in combination to try to achieve that same sort of effect. As you might know, gums have some of their own issues when it comes to our gut tolerance and the response of our microbiome. So these things can cause problems for people who are more sensitive. To help with the texture, most foods will include multiple types of gluten-free flours, either coming from gluten-free grains or other types of starches. This combination of textures and flavors can improve that mouthfeel that we keep talking about. But the more ingredients we have, the more likely it is that one of those ingredients isn't something that's a good fit for your system. So, although complexity might improve the way that we feel when we eat the food, it isn't necessarily something that is going to be tolerated by our gut or our immune system. Lastly, if you have a food that's lost some of its flavor, what's the easiest way to make it taste better? Well, we want to add a lot of sugar to it. And you'll find that many gluten free foods will have much higher levels of sugar in them than their gluten containing counterparts. So, in the end, what does this lead us to? It leads us to an extremely processed food that has novel ingredients, that has many more added ingredients, and higher levels of sugar that we're probably trying to limit anyways. This type of a combination can be a challenge for our immune system to respond to. It can also put an increased load on our liver and detox systems, and it can encourage blood sugar changes and insulin responses that can contribute to the perpetuation of autoimmunity, increases in our body weight, and changes in our sex hormone profile. So, with that said, is eating gluten free foods worse than eating gluten? Again, no. But if we're choosing processed gluten free foods, foods that are attempting to be a replacement for many of our gluten containing favorites, we end up introducing a whole host of challenges to our body. Most likely, we're not going to tolerate it very well, and it's going to interfere with the changes that we're trying to make as we go gluten free. So, after going over all that information, you might be asking, is there ever a time when these gluten free foods could be a good option? And I think there can be. If you're just starting out and making some of these nutritional changes, I wouldn't recommend including some of these processed gluten free foods as part of your strategy. As I keep saying, I think it can limit your progress. And in the beginning, we want to make sure that you're feeling better as quickly as possible. Plus, if you're continuing to react to some of these foods, that can make it confusing for you. And you might think, well, I tried gluten free, but it didn't really work. And even though you were technically gluten free, by including some of these processed foods, it can be hard to tell exactly how you're responding. However, if you're farther along in the process, you've already made some improvements and you've identified the foods that work for you and the ones that don't, then I think having some of these gluten free foods could be a better option. By this point, you understand that yes, there's a lot of ingredients in them, but I know that I can tolerate that a bit better than I can gluten in and of itself. Because of that determination, it could be a good option for a special occasion, like a birthday or a holiday. And you can walk away from that choice knowing that the next day you're going to feel better than if you had chosen the standard option. But I think no matter how you respond, we need to recognize these foods for what they really are. They're highly refined and processed foods, and they probably have more ingredients in them than we know what to do with. And it's for that reason, whether the processed food is gluten free or not, that these types of things really shouldn't be a staple in anyone's diet. So if we're going to use them, as we said, use them on occasion. And be aware that our response to these types of foods isn't just about gluten itself. If we're going to go gluten free, choose foods that are naturally gluten free and avoid the ones that have to be processed to be able to achieve and advertise that status. But let me know in the comments how you feel about some of these gluten-free products. Have you found them to be helpful to you and allowed you to stay on track better? Do they make you feel worse when you eat them and you've ended up trying to avoid them? There's no right answers, and everyone's strategy is going to be a little bit different, and that's totally fine. But I'd love to get your thoughts, your feedback, and just hear what's been working. If you like this video but you need more help and you're interested in working with me, remember that I have my online course available, which is called Natural Hashimoto's Transformation, and you can get more information about it by sending an email to contact@seattlethyroidhelp.com. In the course, I help women with Hashimoto's who are frustrated, overwhelmed, and not getting any help from their doctors better understand their condition and help them to make real improvements in their symptoms by using natural strategies such as nutrition, lifestyle changes, and supplementation. The course includes 8 different modules with a ton of information, and a clear plan of action. That way you can follow the steps and know that you're going to get results. Also, there's a weekly live question and answer session so I can support you every step of the way, and you have lifetime access to it. So if that's something that sounds interesting to you and you want to learn more, as I said, send me an email and we can set up a time to chat, answer all of your questions, and make sure that the course is a good fit. I do hope to hear from you, and I look forward to seeing you on the other side. Otherwise, make sure to follow me on social media for more information, tips, and strategies. Check out some of the other videos right here on the YouTube channel, and don't forget to subscribe. It's free, easy to do, and I really appreciate it. But my name is Dr. Bodle. Thank you as always for all the support, and I will see you in the next one.